And so everything we could describe, talk about, remember, all that is an object within our consciousness. That's true at this moment. Anything that I could describe is an object within our consciousness, right? The tricky part of all of this is that's the most challenging thing to break free of, is that tendency in our minds to constantly pulling attention back into our personal narrative. Now, there are often, I would say probably with a majority of people, there's things in their personal narrative that are going to need some real attention. So I'm not saying that we just transcend this all to leave it behind and think that it's all just magically solved necessarily because we have a deep insight. A lot of it can be solved, who knows how much of it. So I'm not really talking about, that we're not dealing with our personal stuff. I'm making a distinction between we all have our personal stuff, right? You have your personal stuff. I have my personal stuff. Everybody has certain amounts of their stuff. And that has a great magnetic tendency, if you've noticed, right? That which is familiar, that which is conditioned, that which that which has been hijacking our attention for years and years and years and years. That tends to be where our attention will dwell, unless we take some sort of action to do something else. And that's what spirituality is about in its deeper sense, right? It's to break free out of some of these conditioned patterns, right? So there's the psychological version of where you dive deeply into your personal stuff, try to find greater coherence, resolution, and unified at a personal psychological level. That kind of work can be very powerful and very useful, right? Strictly speaking, in the deep spiritual plunge, we're plunging to the very ground of being. And that sounds, interesting to a lot of people or intriguing. And yet the most challenging thing we have on the way is simple distractions of an almost infinite variety, that we get distracted by this and that and that and this thought and that thought and that thought and this feeling and that feeling and the other feeling, that experience, and and 1,000 questions around them, and all this can keep us in this, it just keeps us in a particular state of consciousness. We might call egoic consciousness, right? Egoic consciousness isn't like bad, it's not wrong, it's not right or wrong, it's just challenging. That's all. To the extent that we're identified with it, right? If you're not identified with it, then it's almost like I used to describe it as like a hollowed out ego or an egoless ego. Like if we're going to be moving in the world of time and space, we're going to be functioning through something, right? Nobody just functions through just a total blank slate, right? We're all functioning through this human vehicle. Of course, it has its experiences, it has all of that. We're going to be functioning through that. But that's very different to function through our humanity than to be completely identified with the humanity, right? Then we don't have a sense of functioning through it. We have a sense of being limited to it. The idea here isn't to get rid of anybody's humanity. Far from it. It would be simply not to be limited by whatever we feel like our personal limitation is, right? Personal limitations around our identity, how we define and think and feel about ourselves, all of that. So in this sort of diving towards the ground, it's not just our personal psychology and all that can sort of trip us up. It's also the extraordinary stuff, especially when you get past sort of the personal unconscious, you get into the collective. That's like Disneyland of images and ideas and I mean, it's a wild and crazy place, and some of it can be extremely intriguing and mesmerizing, and it's the reason that any contemplative spiritual system that I know of that really aims towards enlightenment has some sort of warning, you might say, sort of like, well, if you get to a certain depth, all this sort of wild stuff can come to you, even maybe some spiritual powers or things can come unto you, and be careful. Because if you grasp anything in that domain, that's kind of often going to be where you solidify, where you get stuck, where your identity re-solidifies, right? The allure towards entertainment and especially power is very, very, very great. And in certain domains, in the deep depth of our psyche, there's a lot of power of all kinds, and there's always been, like I said, through any tradition that I know of, certain kind of like warnings, like be careful when you get into this domain, because there's a lot of candy. And a lot of that candy has to do with power. And most people are very allured with power, because then we think we can control our experience and control our life. And, maybe we'll be able to make it just the way we want to. Not that most people think it out quite that obviously, but sometimes they're acting that way, So it's just to say that, obviously, I hope in this teaching that the primary interest that I'm aiming for here is to help awaken that ground and then start to live from it, right? Because that deeper ground of our being is starting to become more aware of itself, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're very good at living from it, especially when we're challenged, right? And that's something that for the vast majority of people, which means 99.9%, right, that even if they have a sort of a deep awakening, it's going to take some practice to really be able to embody that in more and more and more and more and more and more of your life, right? And what I mean when I say to the ability to embody what you realize, right? I think we all kind of have a certain sense of that. I think everybody has a sense of, that you've done something before and you go, gosh, I knew that wasn't, I knew that wasn't a good idea, or I know it now, or it's like your wisdom mind took a vacation, right? And who knows what we do. Then we come back and we reconnect with kind of wisdom mind and wonder, now, what was I doing there? What was I thinking, so we can get hijacked, with some of these old reactions pretty easily, unless we're bringing a great amount of attention to it. I think the most powerful aspect of spirituality is attention itself. This is our currency. I think of attention as your life currency. It's like what you give your attention to is what you're spending your life's currency on, is what you're saying, this is so important that it's worth putting my life force into this rather than everything else, because this is the most important thing. That's why I'm doing it.